my name is Dave, and today we're going to be installing a scope on the Midwest Industries QD scope mounts. The QD scope mounts are available in various ring sizes as well as different heights. For example, we have a higher height here versus this model here, and depending on what your preference or your scope objective size is, depends on the mount that you will choose. More information is available on the webpage of the different models available. Today we will be installing the Trijicon AccuPower 1:8 scope with the 34mm QD scope mount. The tools needed to install the scope into the scope mount include the appropriate hex key and driver. The size that we'll be using today is a 9/64. A standard Allen key set would work just fine as well. An inch-pound torque wrench, some degreasing agent and swabs or rags. I recommend some medium-strength Loctite or thread locking compound. And what comes in handy to level your scope relative to the mount is either a feeler gauge set or some small levels. We'll put a list of all the recommended and required tools on the screen now, and you can pause that for future reference or if you'd like to take notes. Generally, the first step in installing a scope in any ring or mount is to determine the eye relief, which is the distance from the rear of the scope to your eye. That generally will require the rifle, and you'll basically adjust the scope back and forth to figure out where the best position is for you. Now, being this is a QD scope mount, I'm going to mount the scope into the mount, and then I can use the QD function to move it back and forth on the upper receiver. Manipulating the QD throw lever is simple. First, we're going to push the button here to release the lock. Then we can open the throw lever, which opens up the QD clamping mechanism. To adjust the QD clamping mechanism to your rail, you simply push on the QD mechanism from the one side, allowing the nut on the other side to protrude. Once this protrudes the cutout here, we can adjust it. Turning it clockwise will increase the tension. Turning it counterclockwise will decrease the tension. We don't want to over tighten this tension so that we have to put too much force on the lever when we're tightening it to our Picatinny rail. We'll demonstrate that here now. Now that we have our mount on our Picatinny rail, or in your case this might be your upper receiver or base of your rifle, we're going to try to tighten the throw lever, but we're going to see here that we'll meet resistance. This is too much resistance. Damaging the throw lever by having too much resistance is not covered by warranty. So instead, we're going to press on the mechanism, allow that to release. We're going to turn it counterclockwise. Just a couple of indications. There are several flats on the nut, allowing a lot of fine adjustment. Let's try this. That's better, but we're not quite there. So we're just going to loosen it. Now that is too loose. We can still have some movement on the rail, and we didn't meet any stopping point resistance, so we'll have to tighten it up just a little bit. So we'll split the difference. And right about there feels good. We've started to felt the clamping force at about this angle, and with just light to moderate force, we can complete the closing of the throw lever. It is now secure and there is no movement. We'll repeat this for the second lever. Now we can install our scope into the rings. Now we will remove all of the socket head cap screws from the top of the mount. Make sure that when you remove them from the mount, you place them in a position where they cannot roll away or become lost. Repeat for all of the screws. Now that we have our screws removed, I like to degrease the screws as well as the threaded portion of the mount. I'll just use some denatured alcohol and simply clean the threaded portion of the screws, removing any machining oil or cutting oil, just to make sure that the thread locker compound that you'll be using can adhere properly to the screws. Repeat for all of the screws. Using a small swab or pipe cleaner, we can clean the threaded portion of the scope mount to degrease it. Repeat for all of the holes. Make sure all of the degreasing agent has evaporated or dried completely from the screws and the receiver. Now we can take the thread locking compound of your choice and apply a small amount to each screw. We'll repeat for all of the screws, and then we can begin installation. Now we can place the scope into the bottom half of the mount, and you will position this according to your eye relief preference or the design of the scope. We can replace the top halves. Now you can insert the screws into the rings. And we're just going to snug them up. We don't want to tighten the screws to the point where the scope cannot move or where we cannot make any adjustments, because we still have to level the scope. We'll repeat for all of the screws. Now that we have all of the screws inserted into the rings, you can see that we can still adjust the scope, moving it back and forth or rotating it to make sure it is level. There are different options you can use to level the scope into the mount. You can use small levels such as these, one on the top of the scope cap, one on the rail of your rifle or receiver. That works fine and it's a proven method. Another method that works really great with these QD mounts is to use a feeler gauge set. And that feeler gauge set will go in between this flat portion of the mount and the bottom flat of the scope. Most scopes on the market have a bottom flat, which works really great. There is other leveling tools and things available on the market as well. We're going to go ahead and use the feeler gauge set until we determine the appropriate thickness. And what's nice with a quality feeler gauge set is you have a lot of adjustment. The goal is so the scope doesn't rotate back and forth, and then it is in alignment to the mount. Take your time and make sure you get this right. Once you have determined the appropriate thickness of feeler gauges needed, make sure you slide the feeler gauge up and down and kind of try to rotate or shimmy it. And that'll just make sure that everything is in alignment. I'm going to go ahead and just confirm the placement of my scope into the mount. And again, reconfirm with the feeler gauge. I'm not feeling any movement or rotation or play back and forth. So I know I have a good snug fit and I can begin to snug down the screws further. When I snug down the screws, I'm going to alternate between sides. Alternating between sides will help to make sure that the top half of the ring tightens down evenly to the bottom half, creating even seams, and it's not putting more torque on one side of the scope versus the other. You can also go in a star pattern if you would prefer. We'll repeat for the rear ring, again either alternating or going in a star pattern. And again, we're not trying to tighten to final torque, we're just snugging down. As you're tightening down the ring screws, again, verify with the feeler gauge that you're still not feeling any play or rotation movement. And as you're starting to tighten this down, you can actually remove the feeler gauge, because as we tighten down, it's going to put a little bit more pressure on the feeler gauge, making it more difficult to remove if we waited until the very end. Once you have all of the cap screws tightened evenly and snug, visually verify to make sure that the rings are in alignment with the mount. They're not off balance or canted to one side or the other. This looks great. Now we can do our final torque. Make sure you check the manual of your scope or optic to see if they have a recommended torque value. Some scopes can handle more torque than others, so we want to make sure you check with the manufacturer's preference if there is one. If no preference is listed, these size screws lubricated with thread locker can handle approximately 15 to 18 inch-pounds of torque. Use the inch-pound torque driver of your choice, set to the appropriate torque level, and again, in that star or alternating pattern, we're going to tighten to the appropriate torque level. Repeat for all of the screws. Now we have completed installing the scope into the QD scope mount, and we're ready to put this on our rifle. Select the appropriate position on either the upper receiver or the base of your rifle. And pushing forward towards the muzzle, we can now tighten the throw levers into the locked position. Make sure you adjust for proper tension as demonstrated previously in this video. We have just completed installing the mount onto our rifle and we're ready to head to the range. If you need any more information, or if you'd like more information on other products available, make sure you check out the webpage, MidwestIndustriesInc.com. A link will be listed below. If you need any assistance, don't hesitate to give the technical support folks a call. They'd be happy to assist you. We hope you enjoyed this installation video, and as always, if you need any help or guidance, don't hesitate to seek the assistance of a competent gunsmith or certified armorer. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.